Geico makes it easy to get affordable renter's insurance in as little as 90 seconds. And then you'll start to wonder why everything else isn't so fast. Like, why does it take so long to do the dishes? A meal that's gone in 3 requires 45 minutes worth of dishes. Doesn't make sense. But it does make sense to get renter's insurance through Geico. That way, that pile of dirty dishes and the other things you love are covered. Get more with Geico.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices. That's why they offer a tool called Auto Quote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies. So you save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Hey folks, welcome. It's the Unsung Podcast. It's your favourite friends, Mark and Chris. Say hi, Chris.
Hi.
Hi. This week is the same as every other week. We're going to talk about a record which we think is unsung.
Musical Groundhog Week.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. What's your 3 most hated things this week, Mark? I'm going to guess number 1, couriers.
Yeah, that's not 1 and 2. Oddly, today and all of the last 2 weeks, it's been mostly every. But today, Yodel or Yodel, or whoever I don't know how you say it, have decided they're going to throw their hat in the ring. Although they're not quite as bad as Every, who did lose a guitar that I posted after selling it on eBay.
I think that'll be getting sold on eBay again.
Well, it did get delivered.
It did. It turned up.
Yeah, because I emailed the CEO. And
he had it.
His executive team got back to me.
He had it in his motor.
He did.
Like, shit, I'm going to have to put this one back.
So it turned out it was just sitting in the hub in Scotland, wherever the fuck that is. I think maybe it's up near Motherwell.
There's probably a lot of good stuff there.
Yeah, it was sitting in there just for a week before they decided to actually move it. And
see,
it was
if you work in the Every Hub in Motherwell, going to get us some freebies. Don't really care what it is.
Please. I also emailed my MP and MSP. My MP's office got back to me like the next day. And we're like, we're going to look into this for you. So
yeah, went full Karen.
I went full Karen, man. I went nuclear.
You speak to the management, aye?
It's because like I did some Googling and
sorry to any Karens that listen to the show, by the way.
Every have been at it for ages, right? They've been up, mentioned in Parliament a few times. There was a whole time for the entirety of a week over Christmas last year, they just refused to deliver parcels to 2 towns in Scotland. Just because. And they expect to lose.
To be fair, there's a couple of towns in Scotland don't deserve to have things delivered to them.
But everybody
Kilwinning is definitely
have to have a Christmas though, man.
There's no Christmas in Kilwinning, man.
But yeah, that's probably for the best. But they reckon
But enough of this hatred towards couriers, Mark. What are the other things in your list?
That was 1 and 2.
1 and 2. You got anything else you hate this week?
Yes, but nothing I want to say on this podcast right now.
Yeah, that's intriguing. Is it erectile dysfunction?
No, that does seem to work okay for the most part at this moment in time.
Oh, well, hopefully not right now.
Well, it might have missed it.
It's not going that well. Alright, okay, good. Well, we did promise that we're going to get ripped right into it this week, didn't we?
Yeah.
We're like, we'll just get fucking straight into the content. That'll bring them flooding
3
in.
minutes in, we're doing well. We're doing well. What's your 3 most hated things this week, Chris?
I mean, you can't really overlook that fiasco in the Oval Office, can you?
That was pretty bad.
That's pretty fucking high up there, man. I mean, JD Vance probably more than Donald Trump in the context of that. I mean, have you ever seen Mary a fucking cretin? What a gimp, honestly.
And then he comes out and said that Britain have never fought a war in the last 20 years. Like,
no, we've been at him.
No, exactly.
Gogglebox. No worse, just Gogglebox.
Yeah.
Aye. So there's plenty of things, man. There's plenty of things. I mean, I'm not going to Limp Bizkit this weekend, not because I hate them. You know my feelings on Limp Bizkit. I think they aged surprisingly well when
they
you
get it
consider
now,
some of their peers.
Yeah.
We could have been at Napalm Death tonight. We're not. We're on the job.
We're on the job.
On the fucking job.
On the job.
Will we get any thanks?
Better fucking deserve this. You better appreciate this.
And who else could we have seen? Well, there's a few things on this week.
Full of Hell and Crowbar are playing with them.
That's right. It's quite a stacked bill, isn't it?
Totally.
I tell you who I hate this week. My number 3, Melvins.
I heard you mention this.
Get yourself in the fucking sea, Melvins. Really, really unimpressed. Melvins, by the way, have booked 8 English shows and not a single show in Wales, Scotland or Northern Ireland, and only 1 in the Republic of Ireland. 8 English shows. I mean, some of these shows are less than a 2 hours drive for each other. One of them is in Norwich. Again, in the unlikely event we've got listeners in Norwich, sorry, but I've played in Norwich and that's about as good as it gets. It's fucking Norwich. I mean, Norwich instead of Cardiff or Glasgow or Belfast is fucking ridiculous. And then anyone that pulled them up on their socials, whether it's the Melvins themselves or whether it's just some minion, fucking had the audacity to start sassing back when people were like, here, why do I have to, well, let's say you're a fan in Inverness, why do you have to drive like fucking treacherous, like 7-8 hour journey to go and see them when they could easily, fuck you, Melvins, fuck you. And by the way, there's going to be a wee bit more of that because the band we're discussing this week, Mark, they did the same thing when they reunited after a decade.
Oh yeah. Aye,
right. Fucking not impressed. If you're from any one of the other countries that make up Britain, you're probably familiar with this gripe.
Yeah.
So who are we talking about this week?
This week we're talking about Ink Dagger.
Ink and Dagger.
And we're doing the album The Fine Art of... This just went right out of my fucking
Original
head.
Sin.
The Fine Art of Original...
It's your choice.
That was my choice. It just, as soon as I started saying it, the second half of it just like evaded me.
Probably your brain wandered to delivery drivers.
Yeah, it really did, I think. That is The Fine Art of Original Sin, being a fucking delivery driver.
So, we actually spoke briefly about these guys when we covered Refused, The Shape of Punk to Come with Grant Donaldson recently. And it was in the context of, The Shape of Punk to Come had all these different new tones and textures within the context of a punk record. And actually, we kind of discussed on that show that these guys got there first. Ink and Dagger did that. They mixed those ingredients first, and it was primarily on this record that they did so. I mean, they toured together. They toured with Refused, so it seems likely that Refused heard this.
Well, actually, they toured together on the Shape of Punk to Come tour.
But which is maybe Refused doffing their cap, but Refused were already a band, and the musicians in Refused were well aware of some of the things that were happening on the American scene at this time. This album's from 98, so Refused were a thing. I will say with Ink and Dagger, I have had them in my collection now for probably about 20 plus years. I remember they were one of the bands when I first moved in with Matt in I must have been about 23, 24 in Stirling. We would leave the computer on overnight to download individual MP3s.
Yeah, that's kind of how I got this record as well.
Yeah, I got this from Epitonic, a site that used to give you like one track by each album. Same site that got me the Shipping News and Blonde Redhead and a whole bunch of bands that we've discussed in the past. And I always remember coming back to it and being like, I think I should be into this band. I'm into it. So many bands around them at the Drive-In, Les Savy Fav, Refused, loads of stuff like that, Botch. I just never really got into this band. And when you mentioned it, I was like, well, I suppose it's going to be interesting for me to go back and try and work out whether it was just that I simply didn't get into it and should have, or whether I did, as I suspect, try to get into them on multiple occasions and just for some reason it didn't click.
Yeah, that's. I guess we'll get down to that when we go through this. I guess for me, how did I get into them? Well, I kind of first heard them and then bounced off them quite quickly. It was in the early 2000s, so it wouldn't have been it would have been a few years after they stopped being a band, because I was getting into Thursday and I was getting into My Chemical Romance at the time, and I remember, and also Glassjaw. I remember Geoff Rickly speaking very highly of Ink and Dagger in interviews, and Glassjaw like also mention them as being quite a big influence on their sound. It's less clear to me how that is true for Glassjaw than it is for a band like Thirsty, or particularly My Chemical Romance, particularly the first My Chemical Romance record. And also Gerard Way's vocal style, very indebted to Sean McCabe's.
Okay. I am not au fait with the early My Chemical Romance stuff, just the chart bothering stuff, and I'm not a fan.
Yeah, their first album was oh god, I can't remember the name of it.
Not famous.
You Brought Me Your Bullets, I Brought You My Love, something like that.
I hate that title.
And it was produced by Geoff Rickly, and I think he does vocals on one song maybe, and it's a bit of a mess of a record, to be honest, but they sound a bit like Ink and Dagger.
Alright, that's interesting. I didn't expect that. For some reason I thought they'd come from a more sort of gothy pop punk sort of origin.
There's a bit of goth in Ink and Dagger, which we'll come to.
There is. Shortly. Well, they're a vampire themed post-hardcore band to
for the most part they were, but so that's kind of how I got to Ink and Dagger. And I remember downloading the fine art of Original Sing from Soulseek, which, by the way, Soulseek is still a thing. Weird.
This podcast runs on Soulseek.
Yeah. And you can actually find the entire Ink and Dagger discography online if you Google it as well.
I will give that a mention later on, actually.
Because it's not on Spotify. So there's a reasonable chance that if you've never heard this band before, you're probably not going to come across them.
Yeah.
Because they're just not available.
Well, this is the thing, I think, without giving any spoilers away, they're a band. They seem to have slipped between the cracks, partly because Sean, the singer, died young. He died just after their second album, and we'll muse on this a bit, but it'd be interesting to have seen where the band might have gone had that not happened. But yeah, but we'll go over some basics of the band, right? So they were active from 1995 to 1999 originally, and then they briefly reformed in 2010 to 2011. That's after Sean's death, with your man Geoff Rickly of Thursday on vocals. We've obviously spoken about Thursday on the show before.
And United Nations as well.
There's a place called 314, the house that they shared. It's one of these kind of situations where you have like a multiple occupancy house that members of a scene sort of gather around, and so 314 house is a big part of their early days and the lore around the band. They played their first ever gig there on March the 20th 1996, which, by the way, the set is on YouTube.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff on YouTube.
Yeah, you can watch that show on YouTube.
Does it sound like it was recorded using a shoe? It
sounds like it was recorded on the camera's microphone, and it's completely overloading. But it's good. I mean, having been to plenty of house shows and having been to plenty of bands' first shows, it's good. They had a bit of a rotating cast over the years, but the two permanent members were Don Devore, or Don Devore, I don't know how he pronounces it, guitar, and the aforementioned Sean Patrick McCabe on vocals. We'll come back to Sean in a bit more detail in a moment. Don Devore was, so as a guitarist, he's a contemporary of stuff like Botch and Converge, but he's playing, I think, channels something that's a bit more Discord
100%
aligned,
Discord. But not mathy. It's definitely in the Fugazi vein.
It nods towards mathy, like there's like the odd kind of like pulled kind of note here and there, but it doesn't get overly technical. He was also in the Icarus Line for a bit, and that's a band that their trajectories will cross a number of times.
There's
a good Vice article about this. I don't know if you read it.
Yeah. Can I just say that the writer of that Vice article, David Anthony, is it's about the album, The Fine Art of Original Sin.
Yes.
He's a fantastic writer. His website, Former Clarity, is very, very good. Just before the pandemic, he had some really bad health problems. And
Searching for a Former Clarity. What's that? Who band is
that's a Against Me album, and that's a direct reference to Against Me. Yeah. He had some health problems before the pandemic, and he wrote quite a lot about them on this. What was a Substack, it's now just his own website. He moved everything off, but he still writes quite regularly for a bunch of different publications. He's a fantastic writer. Seems like a really nice guy as well. I think he's got a podcast, and he's been on a bunch of podcasts. So shout out to him. He's really cool.
Well, it is a good article. Yeah, he commented that he thinks the rotating cast of band members gave them a bit of mystique over the years, because. So I work in a music venue, I work in a bar, you go around bars in Glasgow. It reminds me of when people work in a bar and so many different people will have done their time in that bar. And they'll have crazy notorious stories and mad nights and kind of fuzzy memories from when they were wasted. And when you hear people talking about this band, it feels kind of similar, because they're a pretty riotous band. We'll go into that in a lot more detail as the show goes on. But the anecdotes from tour in particular
there's so many.
Are wild, yeah. Now, the band at one point also included the comedian and actor Eric Wareheim. That's of Tim and Eric's Awesome Show, for anyone that watches Adult Swim. We mentioned they did briefly reunite to play. It was initially This Is Hardcore Festival in 2010.
That's right.
Geoff Rickly came in on vocals. All proceeds from the band at that point went to help a wee boy called Max Zielanski, who'd been diagnosed with cancer, as I understand it. They played a limited number of other shows in a few US cities, LA, places like that. And then in 2011, they did a UK tour. I say a UK tour in very big inverted commas with Rickly on vocals, because they played 5 English shows and fuck all anywhere else, which is really fucking ripping my knitting.
Yeah.
They played in Tunbridge Wells.
No
which
Glasgow. Is so close to London, by the way.
No Belfast.
Why
no Edinburgh,
bother?
no Cardiff, no Swansea. Tunbridge fucking Wells. Anyway, yeah. So that Vice column, by the way, was called The Shape of Punk. Which is a little bit ironic, since I think this band shares so much DNA with Refused. They were formed in Philadelphia by vocalist Sean McCabe and guitarist Don Devore. The pair worked up an idea for a band that was seemingly a response to the no-nonsense tough guy sect of hardcore. So it's interesting that this band from the outset was something of a response to the kind of, I want to say meat-headed. It wasn't meat-headed, but it was certainly quite po-faced and very self-important hardcore of the time.
Yeah. And
they went to great and comedic lengths to burst the bubble of some of those hardcore bands. Hello, Earth Crisis. We'll get to that. That article continues. Instead of falling in line with the trends of the day, such as straight edge veganism or Hare Krishna, the pair opted for vampirism as their inspiration. It was a decision that was patently absurd, the kind of thing that should have gotten them dismissed as a gimmick and never given a second thought. But it was their commitment to it, coupled with McCabe's cult of personality, that made this more than some toothless shtick. And yeah, as we said, we'll talk about Sean McCabe a wee bit here, because he was found dead shortly after finishing their second album, their last album. He sadly joined the 27 Club, which I didn't realise until we were doing this. Died of asphyxiation, basically choked on his own vomit when he was passed out, seriously drunk. And they'd already announced that they were disbanding at the time, though. Sean McCabe, I wasn't able to get a lot about this, but it kind of fits with his personality as we go on here. He was apparently a bit of a notorious provocateur on message boards back in the day in the old BBS systems. I think he almost developed a bit of a character for himself in that he then played into as part of the band. There's a photographer called Robbie Red Cheeks, and I don't think that's his birth name, but I've seen a photo of him. He does have red cheeks. Robbie Red Cheeks knew them pretty well, and he's got a few really interesting comments to pass here. Sean McCabe was an unexplainable force, one of the most intelligent people I have ever known, and one of the craziest. He owned the internet before people knew what it was. He once told me this internet thing will someday take over the world and people's everyday lives. That was in like 1995, and he was right. Vice has also commented, McCabe was the band's star. While he sounded shockingly like a teenage Ian MacKaye on Love Is Dead, their first EP, as the years went on, he found a vocal approach that was less referential. With makeup on, McCabe's troll-like disdain towards the populist hardcore movement became something real, bringing the shit-stirring persona he built on the early 90s message board alt-music hardcore scene into the real world. It would manifest in moments such as when he threw yogurt and beer cans at the militant vegans in Earth Crisis during their set. I've talked about Earth Crisis before in the show. By all accounts, a very capable and highly rated band musically.
Hugely influential.
Not a big fan of their pro-life stance,
Nope.
especially on their earlier records. Don't know where they've ended up in recent years.
Kind of logically follows from a certain brand of veganism, though, right? All life is sacred, etc., and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it kind of just ties into that really... you have to be young, I think, or you should have to be young to have such a militant sense of self-righteousness and devotion to ideas.
Earth Crisis fans and very straight-edge folks in the early days used to, beat people up that were smoking at gigs and all that, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I saw someone refer to them as rainbow fascists.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. The article goes on, as McCabe was lionised for so openly playing the heel, it was only a matter of time before that got turned around in the band. At a hardcore festival in Michigan in 97, the crowd threw heads of garlic at Ink Dagger while they played. Much like McCabe did with Earth Crisis, onlookers challenged Ink Dagger's very premise while they were on stage. Mm-hmm. Good bit of patter on the crowd there, I have to admit.
So there's an interview with Sean McCabe on a website on a website called Ink 19 from 1999. Weird thing, I actually have the guy that wrote this on my Facebook. I think he worked back when I used to run a music website about 15 years ago now. I think he worked for a PR company, and I think that's how he identified it. But I didn't realise it when I started doing the interview. I was like, I know the name of the author, and it turns out it's the same guy. But yeah, one of the things he spoke about was that he started to rail against the idea of like being the whole vampire thing when people started to expect them to do it.
Yeah. And
that was a large part of why they started to bring in electronics on the final original sound, and I suppose also why their sound would later go on to evolve again in the last record, because it was about keeping people guessing. Sean McCabe openly said in that interview that when they started out, they were just trying to get attention, so people would pay attention to us. But he's like, now we have attention, we need to try and do something different.
He strikes me as a bit of a contrarian.
Very much.
And so as soon as something starts to become expected, he's bound to push against it.
Yeah, they were just basically sick of his exact quote. The band were sick of people seeing them as, quote, emo goth core.
Emo gothcore?
Yeah, and a band that wears makeup. They were just sick of it and decided that we're going to do something different, and then the whole thing fell away. Although he did say that it wasn't going to go away entirely. He left it on the table that they could go back to it at some point in the future.
They still reference it on the album. We'll talk about that shortly. In terms of their pattern vibe, as Mark says, emo gothcore, others have just said horror punk, but not horror punk, because sonically there's not really much about them that sounds like that.
Definitely. I mean, horror punk, Misfits, AFI, stuff like that.
Even the Cramps and stuff,
This is not
it's nothing like that, no. The website you were talking about earlier on, for people that want to hear their stuff, Sophie's Floorboard is the name of the blog. Thanks for helping us out there, Sophie. That website mentions that they are perhaps one of the few bands who can present legitimate art pieces on stage and not come off as a group of pretentious pricks. For one, they would often perform in makeup, more specifically dressed like vampires. Their early merch, some of the shirts bore the kind of subheading, the Philadelphia Society of Future Vampires. There's a band actually called that now as well. Their onstage patter included blood and makeup. They vomited on Christmas trees for one show.
Oh, so that actually comes from that interview we was talking about. He mentions that specifically, and Sean McCabe's response says, we do remember doing that, but that was like the least of the antics we got up to. And he spoke about like drinking heroic amounts and taking morphine and all that. It's like that shit was just like very low grade compared to some of the stuff that we got up to.
I think they egged Hare Krishnas as well, didn't they?
Did they?
I think as some kind of slight to Ray Cappo and that whole fucking movement at the time. An interesting thing about them, so the aesthetic of the band was pretty intense, not just in the fact they wore makeup, but the lighting became a real feature of their shows. So in 1987 they went on tour with Botch, a band that we've covered in here before. After that tour though, Botch actually became known for playing shows in total darkness with floodlights that they'd flip on and off as if they were strobe lights, and that was something that Ink Dagger had been using in their set for a long time, but it became something that Botch were known for. Which is a bit of a shame, but again, it shows the band being kind of innovators.
Yeah.
Apparently that gimmick, by the way, that lighting gimmick used to blow fuses at venues quite regularly, and they would end up playing in the dark through no choice of their own. They would have to.
That's wild. Yeah, I've seen a few bands do that as well, localish bands.
I didn't know where we got it from, but in one of my bands, we just used to play with those floor lamps, work lamps, turn off all the lights and make a really stark shadows in the ceiling. It's a nice way to go about it.
Yeah. On the whole vampire aesthetic thing, there's a really good podcast called Gut Feeling, and they interviewed the person who runs it, interviewed the drummer on this record, a guy called Josh Brown, and he actually talks about how he was never into the makeup. He just kind of thought it was silly to begin with. A quote from him: "I remember him mostly just being embarrassed to do the thing. The ritual was that we would all meet up in the women's bathroom to do our makeup. However, eventually I started to find it quite liberating. I was always kind of a shy person and had a problem coming out of my shell in the first place. So to put on the vampire makeup was kind of like having a mask on, so it really helped me to kind of break free and lose myself on stage, which is really cool."
Slipping into character a wee bit. Yeah, again, I can very much relate to that from one of the projects I was involved in that did the same.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. But not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.
We'll talk a wee bit about the chaos around the band, the chaos and the hijinks, right? Because I think you read the same thing, noecho.net has an article of testimonials by people who witnessed some of the maddest chapters of the band's history.
And they were in the band as well.
Yeah. One person that needs a shout out here is Jenny Park, Jennifer Lane Park, who joined and did vocals for the band at one point. According to your man Robbie Redcheeks, they fed off each other when Jenny joined Ink Dagger. It took the band to a hyper level, and he described Jenny and Sean as Sid and Nancy. Now, Jenny Park has said, quote, "Sean was really a genius. I remember when Ink Dagger was still a concept, something Don and Sean would be up at 3 a.m. discussing at Little Pete's Diner. One of Sean's goals with Ink Dagger was to reunite Philly's punk rock and hardcore scenes. With Ink Dagger's infamous Halloween show at Stalag 13, they did just that. We knew the first Halloween show had to be spectacular. Sean asked me to write an introduction, and Chris Tropia built a coffin for me to jump out of. I was wearing head-to-toe black vinyl. I remember reciting the introduction for Sean and George outside the venue that night. They agreed it was hot and we were excited to go on. I'll never forget the sensation of anticipation as they carried me through the crowd in the coffin, and then I exploded on them, calling them little beasts, fake blood everywhere. It was epic." I think a few other people have commented in that episode, like she was up in everybody's face, yelling at them, and they just absolutely showered the crowd with loads of fake blood.
That became a recurring thing. The coffin, like Sean would come out in it at the start of gigs and all that as well. As I discussed, they did eventually drop all the gimmick, but yeah, that must have been something really weird to see in if you're at a hardcore show in Philadelphia and suddenly you've got these weird goth kids just doing this kind of hokey theatrics on stage.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. There's another anecdote here. Dave Wagenschutz, who was, I think, the original drummer.
Yeah, he was also in Lifetime. That's
exactly what it says here. So in 1994, after walking away from Lifetime, I was kind of lost. 95 brought new people and places into my life. Ink Dagger formed the next year, and for me, it was my way of working it all out through music. When I listen to the Love Is Dead 7-inch, I now cringe at the production value, but also smile when the goosebumps crawl across my arms while I'm hearing You Can't Change Into Me. That summer, we barely made it back from tour alive. I'm amazed that Eric Van survived the journey to Vancouver Island, and with the help of my parents, escaped St. Louis to return to Philadelphia. I will leave those stories on the side of the I-80 where they belong.
It's interesting you mention Eric Wareham there, because I actually found a Tumblr account that had a quote from Eric about his time in the band. It must have been taken from another interview, but the source wasn't there. It was like, "Yes, I was in Ink Dagger, the infamous vampire band, only for 1 month though, as I toured with them, and they were so crazy that I had to quit." I mean, there was this one tour we were literally lost our minds and had no money. There was this one show at a university and they didn't pay us our guarantee, and the guys in the band just unscrewed the entire PA system and stole it. We drove into Canada and sold the PA in the next town to make up for the money. And he says, I've got a lot of stories I can't even tell you. Somebody did a documentary about the band and they wanted me to edit it, but he's just never done it. So,
wow.
Yeah.
There's a mystery bassist from the band that pops up on Reddit answering questions and comments. I've got a couple of quotes from him later on.
That's cool.
I don't know which bassist.
Are you sure it's a him? Because I think most of our bassists were women.
I have no idea. Another anecdote we've got here: Demian Johnston, who was in Kiss It Goodbye, who toured with Ink Dagger. Thanks to their first bass player, Eric, they had video evidence of crimes and dangerous hijinks. I think they stole a vending machine. It's a bit of a blur. I remember the shoplifting. I remember George also leaving his vintage left-handed, incredibly rare Fender Mustang or Jaguar on the ground behind their van after a show in Goleta, and seeing him almost faint when a van drove over it. But somehow it was fine. I remember another story about an old man coming to a show in Texas, armed to the teeth to kill them because he heard they were vampires. We laughed about it, but I think just like Andy Daly's character, this man who claimed to have killed all the vampires in Texas may just have been a delusional serial killer.
Yeah, the guy, yeah. Imagine some guy with guns turn up to a show thinking you're actually vampires and wanting to kill you. That's absolutely insane. I've got other stories if you want to keep going.
Yeah, we can trade a few here.
So going back to that podcast with Josh Brown, he actually speaks about kind of his moving forward in time a little bit, about a European tour they did in spring 1999, and they played a show at Drexel University, and he talks about how him and Sean had been up for days, and there was a radio station on, they kept talking over it, and they could hear other bands playing downstairs and huge crowds coming to all their gigs, and then this was coming to the gig and all that. And he says, I remember Sean coming up to him and saying, here, take these. And basically he took like 2 different kinds of ecstasy, and he just remembers doing nothing that night essentially. I don't think I played one note in any song in the set that night. I do remember twirling around in the lights and getting caught up in my guitar cables. People were yelling druggies at us, and I remember looking over at Don and just seeing how disgusted he was, looking over at me saying, that's it, it's over, the band is over. Which maybe explains why they decided to disband after they were about to disband.
Yeah, that's
Sean
right.
died.
Another anecdote from Ryan McLaughlin, Prima drummer who actually joined Ink Dagger at one point. So we had to take a pee, so we stopped at a truck stop with an arcade. Sean got caught stealing and we all bounced, as in ran out. We drove a few hours before we needed some gas, and we pulled up to the pump. We asked Robbie for money. Rob, wake up, shouting into the back of the van. We need some money. It was only then that we realised we'd left him back at the previous truck stop. So we drove hours back, and there he was playing video games with our money. He'd also taken an old-time black and white photo as a cowboy or some shit, with the tour money spread out on the floor while holding a couple of shotguns. And that guy also remembers being in Canada at a cabin with the band when a bunk bed collapsed on Sean, nearly killed him, as well as Todd jumping off the balcony of the US's largest mall into the pirate ship Lagoon.
Wow.
What a bunch of wee fucking miscreants. Can you imagine being in, I don't know, Silverburn?
Yeah, I just want to clarify something. Josh Brown was actually one of the bass players, so that could be the very person who's been replying on Reddit.
Could be.
Because he seems to... this podcast was from a couple of years ago. He also talks a little bit about the reunion, which we'll get to in a second. But when you were talking about that, I can't remember if it was in the interview with Josh or if it was in that No Echo article. But somebody says that they knew they were never spending any more than one night in one town, so they just tried to cause as much chaos as they could because they were never going to go back.
I've actually got that. So Chris P, also of Prima, we were rarely in the city for more than a day at a time, so we caused as much chaos as possible, knowing we would be gone the next day. He describes a run-in they had with cops. While stopping at a rest stop, someone decided we should smash the vending machines with a baseball bat that we had. It all started with the 2 vans driving west out of Pennsylvania, and we came upon an 18-wheeler like a big lorry. It's going slow, and so we tried to pass them. 2 vans obviously jockeying for positions to get by this truck. So we go into the other lane, and there's another 18-wheeler also braking in front of us. The 2 trucks are now blocking both lanes, and both vans, they're slowing down, and the trucks are slowing us down, and we're wondering why. Then we see the red and blue lights. It was the 18-wheeler slowing us down for the cops because someone had seen the vending machines and they'd radioed ahead to the truckers. And underneath most of our feet are pillowcases filled with soda, candy, chips and broken glass. So the cop pulls him over. The cop asks us our info, and we tell them that we're in a band and we're touring. And he tells us that he used to be in a band in the 80s. And the guy says he can't remember the name of it, but it was something like very, very 80s. And without missing a beat, Dave in the band says, I heard you guys were awesome. Which seems to kind of endear them to the cop a bit.
Yeah.
Long story short, that same guy, Dave, takes the fall for the smashed up vending machines and they have to pay for the glass. And the cop leaves to go to the car to write a ticket. And when he comes back, he says, so how do you guys get on tour? And Dave says, we do all right. Pauses and then says, but not enough for snacks though. And the cop apparently burst into laughter. Yeah, I think that's the one you're referring to.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
There's another one here, and I don't want to say George Gonzalez, it might be Jorge Gonzalez.
This is a good one. This is one I was going to bring up. Yeah,
he's the other original guitarist. So he says, in order to stave off the boredom associated with the impossible drives that plagued the first two tours, we would pull over at the local mall to stretch our legs and engage in shoplifting contests with each other, which soon became the sport of choice. We would all go in the mall and then meet in the van around an hour or two later and empty our loot onto the seat to see who had the most valuable score. Usually it would be Robbie and Sean that won, as they would grab huge expensive things that were even behind the counter at times. Of course, stealing is wrong in any form, but to our credit, we only targeted super corporate stores. Before long, we became a full-on organised raid crew. Each member had their role, carefully planned, and then played with precision for each heist. Sean would be the distractor, usually employing such tactics as dropping something really loudly in order to attract attention, mumble some nonsensical yet inquisitive request to draw an employee closer, or if said employee was a cute girl, he'd flirt with abandon. The rest of us were grab men and women if Ashley was around. One time we were sold out of shirts mid-tour right before a huge show in Texas, so instead of waiting for someone to FedEx them, we decided to pull up on our way to the next town at a Gap. Sean did this thing and somehow got 3 employees to make his shopping experience a priority. I think he did something about being an important guy. Noticing that the shop didn't have any security tags on t-shirts, me, Don and Robbie and some others quickly stuffed about 5 full stacks of soft brushed cotton Gap tees into our backpacks and power walked to the van. Once we got to the venue, we broke out a silk screen and went to work, printing t-shirts obviously. I think we sold them for $10 that night, which is less than the cost at the Gap. Bargain of the century, but unfortunately ink needs a bit longer than an hour to dry, which probably led to smudged Rorschach on the chests of countless kids the next day. I mean, it does seem like a band that would have a really good book in them if people could actually bring themselves to say some of the more edgy stories. Like
Ashley speaks a little bit. She spoke to No Echo in 2017, and she speaks a little bit about that Bosch and 9 Iron Spitfire tour, and she says there's a lot of things that I'm not proud of that I did, but there's a few stories I can tell that are quite mild. She was going to tell one about used to play a game called What Would You Do for a 40, and essentially it would always result in like mad stuff like eating everybody's food in one bowl or like licking the back of the van and stuff like that. But she did say that there was one time when they pulled together the money and one of the guys in another band was given it to run bare ass naked through a shopping mall, you know, that kind of stuff. Josh actually also tells some stories about getting involved in fights and shows.
Yeah.
There's a Vancouver show where he says, I remember looking across the stage and Don takes off his guitar, he throws it down and dives into the crowd, and that's when it's come to my attention that there was a brawl, and then Sean jumped in there, and then Dan Murphy, must have been a member of the band at the time, ended up breaking his wrist in somebody's head that night. And then Terry and I just stayed up on stage and we kind of soundtracked the entire brawl. But somebody in the crowd was nice enough to give Dan their wrist bracelet, which enabled him to go to the hospital and pretend he was a Canadian kid to get his hand casted up. And I remember him either having a sprained wrist, a broken hand or something like that, but somebody had helped him out. And probably a good one to maybe end this wee bit on is Josh also talks about the tour we refused. And he says they were literally on the last legs at that point. They basically decided it was going to be our last ever tour, so they really weren't getting along very well. I can remember the guitarist at some shows literally just leaning against the wall as he was playing, but sometimes they were also just incredible. There was a lot of those drives where like a couple of the guys would be in our van because they didn't even want to be in the same band together. So it was really weird, but it was great. They drew a huge crowd all over Europe, which was awesome for us because we've never been over there at the time. And yeah, like you said earlier on, Ink Dagger were clearly a huge influence on Refused. But it seems as though when the album came out, they were just over it. In the episode we did with Grant, we kind of spoke a little bit about how they felt as though nobody really got them and they decided just to go their separate ways. But it seems as though there might have actually been friction in the band at the time as well, if they couldn't even be in the same fucking tour van together, you know.
I'll add one more on the end here because it's a nice one that goes right back to the start. It's by Matt Smith, who was a 314 house resident.
Oh, not the Doctor Who guy, no.
No, funnily enough. And he says it's about the first show they ever did, the one that you can watch on YouTube. The first show was a blur. The band turned all the lights down and there must have been 150 people packed into our wee house to witness the show. The band came down the stairs in single file with Jorge, in the lead holding a candle, and then he stood in front of the crowd and read some evil shit out of an old witch's book before the band picked up their instruments, put on a strobe light, and Sean stepped up in all his vampire makeup and the place just exploded. Apparently Matt Summers had a chicken costume like the one you'd see a guy wearing in front of a fast food joint to try and get you to come in, and he was just wrecking the kids in the pit in a giant chicken costume. Someone apparently has a photo of it somewhere.
Nice. Someone should resurrect that photo.
So I mean, right from the start there was a sense of humour as well, but like clearly chaos and theatre and spectacle. And it was really quite far apart from some of those dead, austere bands that they were touring with. You know, I do want to add as well, right? Because it's easy to get kind of swept up in the kind of humour and you know, all the nostalgia of the anecdotes or something. As somebody that's toured, I can see there being a very fine line where someone's hijinks is another person's annoying as fuck behaviour, and being in a mall when somebody's running about with their dick out or jumping off things and stealing stuff. Yeah, I can actually imagine that being kind of annoying. Being a promoter who maybe puts a band on and then the band get up to fucking bad behaviour, even though the band are saying, oh, we only ever targeted the right people, it doesn't sound like they were always necessarily being particularly fussy.
I think they were off their face a lot of the time. Josh kind of alludes to that when he talks about the reunion. He says when they did the reunion tour, what was the exact quote here? The reunion was a lot like when Dagger ended, but there was a lot of craziness, a huge amount of energy and excitement, and a huge amount of drugs. We just did it like we would have done in the days of the Sean. And I guess that's when Geoff Rickly was probably at like his absolute nadir when it came to heroin addiction.
Nadir or peak, depending on how you view heroin, I suppose. I mean, I did notice online in some comments, you know, you read the comments in some of the videos and some of the threads and stuff, and you find out some interesting details. And there are a few people saying that the band had a rep for stealing things from other groups. Whether or not that's fairly or unfairly earned, I don't know. It could just be a rumour, but I'm just putting it out there because there is. You
see that though. You can see from all those stories and stealing shit, like fucking vending machines, like
and if you're pissed off at a band's behaviour, do you swipe their stuff? I don't know. But as I said, the next bassist, we don't know who, went on Reddit using the handle Crud is a Cult.
That's Josh. That was the band that he was in before.
Right, well there you go. That's who it was in.
Dagger.
And he
I'm not saying it's Josh. It's probably Josh.
So he put a thing up saying we never stole from anyone who didn't owe. He also mentioned, by the way, that he'd smashed Sean with a bass guitar during a refused support slot and busted his head open on stage pretty badly.
Wow.
But yeah, you know, just trying to be a wee bit objective. I really enjoy it. I like the mayhem of it. I think we actually have a paucity of really entertaining, edgy bands, punk rock bands that do get up to mad shit and give you something to get excited about. I know the world can be a very serious and very proper and very woke place, for good and bad, but there is something really engaging about the hedonism of certain musicians that just makes it fucking exciting. I am happy to read the stories without having to be the person picking up the pieces or cleaning the fucking room. It's fine, it's good value, and I'm kind of glad that it exists. But I'm just representing, because there may be some people listening to this podcast going, you guys are glorifying the shit they got up to, they were a bunch of wankers. Well, maybe they were, I don't know, I didn't have to deal with it, but it's entertaining from a distance.
I mean, it's also pretty remarkable that a band that were small, don't get me wrong, like they were not a big band, were able to get up to just as much mad shit as people that have loads of money and can walk away completely consequence free from any of the bad shit they get up to.
Maybe if that guy's guitar had got ruined by that van, he'd have learned a fucking lesson, but because it was absolutely fine, he was like, I can do what I want. Total immunity. So before we skate through their discography, which is mercifully quite brief, Mark, let's just do a wee bit of admin.
Oh yeah, let's do the admin. So if you're a fan of this episode and you've listened to other episodes and you haven't yet signed up to our Patreon, then please go to patreon.com/unsungpod, where you can join our
basic tier
AAA group, or our record club. Now, 2 tiers, it's dead simple. One's £4 a month, one's 15 quid a month.
Or more
if you want. But yeah, for £4 a month, you can get access to episodes a couple of days early, bonus episodes as and when they happen, and you can join our Facebook group. Yeah, I know it's Facebook, it's pure boomer shit. To be fair, we are over 35, and a lot of over 35 still use Facebook, which is fucking baffling to me because I never use Facebook, apart from to post our episodes.
It's kind of hard to have a closed group going on TikTok or Instagram, isn't it?
We could start a Discord, but come on, we're getting old, man.
And we don't need to know how to make bombs.
Yeah.
The podcast is free, but it takes a lot of time to do it. So if you feel like backing us, we'd really appreciate that.
Yes.
It's not a one-way street either. If you do back us, you get onto that AAA group, you get the episodes early, you get access to the bonus episodes, some of which are among our edgier shit.
Yep.
Pretty high quality. A couple more coming as well. And
I should also say, actually, this record had been suggested by people. Well, this band had been suggested by people.
Comes from one of those discussions, yeah. And also, if you go up a level and you go to the record club thing, one of the big advantages is you're doing yourself a favour, because once a month, in theory, we will send you curated albums from independent bands, compilations from independent labels, things that we go really deep diving for, and we're buying these from the acts, we're buying them from the labels. So your money comes to us, we get a slice to keep the pod going, these bands and labels get a slice to put back into whether it's paying off their credit cards that they've maxed out to make these records, or whether it's to do new stuff. And you give yourself a gift once a month, plus all the other shit, plus all the early episodes and all the bonus episodes and all that stuff. So the record thing is like $15 a month. Jesus, that's like what, less than 4 coffees now. That would be great if you feel like doing that. If you don't feel like doing that, basic tier. And if you don't feel like doing that, take it free, but please at least share it to some people. Find an episode you like, find an album you like, anything, just spread the word around. You're doing us a favour that way as well. Or
share a funny story that you've seen in a clip on TikTok or Instagram or any social media site we post them on as well.
Right, back to the task at hand. They have a very brief discography, but we're going to have a look at it quickly here. So it starts with Love Is Dead, the EP from 1996. Pretty fucking raw production, to say the least. We spoke about earlier on how they're a wee bit embarrassed by it. It's the old cassette recorder in a sock, as you've said in the past. By the way, the artwork for this is pretty fucking funny. It's this really shitty kind of clip art of a vampire tombstone with really badly written band name. Did you know that it was apparently Eric Wareheim that did that cover?
That's funny.
And he played bass on this as well. I think that cover was actually his first foray into comedy. There's loads of vampire hints in it, although this is what when we were saying they're far from being a horror punk band. It's a Fugazi vocal style, along with like basically something that's probably even more hardcore than post-hardcore at this point. But yeah, it's got that really sharp, what is it, plexi guitar sound, you know, the really like gated guitar sound in this one. The third track in it, My Lady Love, really ramps up the Ian MacKaye mimicry, as it said in that Vice article. And the fourth one, Newspaper Tragedy, has some really interesting drum ideas poking through it, and I think early on you can hear that they're probably a band that are going to explore those more unusual arrangements as time goes on.
Yeah, I quite liked The Changeling. Is that the same EP?
Yeah,
that was a good song.
I think so.
More feral, really loose, probably more closer to hardcore, and Frigid Shortcomings. It's just clearly an influence on Thursday and structure and pace. I think it could also be possible that I'm mixing that up with the next 7-inch, which was then compiled into a compilation.
Yeah, this mixes it up with itself. So Drive This 7-inch Wooden Stake Through My Philadelphia Heart from 97 started life as a 4-track EP, and then later became a 10-track collection that combined that EP with the Love Is Dead EP and a track from a fanzine compilation. So yeah, You may have mentioned tracks that are on this by virtue of that. I'm not sure. But anyway, the Love Is Dead stuff is remastered in this. Sounds much better. And then other stuff, the fourth track, Full Circle, really cool riff and a good
Very
mosh.
cool.
Yeah. And the 10th track, Crawler, which I believe is the one off the compilation for the zine. The mechanisms are still there, but it's a bit more, I would say, AFI at this point. There's something different happening.
I quite like The Road to Hell. It's a creepy downbeat track with keys and a lumbering, almost kind of vaudeville energy. It does remind me of the Paper Chase a little bit. But it does also go full on Ink and Dagger. There's actually a cover of this. It was recorded during the pandemic by 3 minutes to Late Night.
3 minutes till late night.
Yeah, have you ever seen that? It's like a Arsenio Hall it used to be a talk show, like a YouTube talk show in America, and
You're not about Arsenio Hall.
no, the guy's called Arsenio Hall.
Guar.
Yeah,
As in Guarsenio.
yeah.
Fucking hell, man.
And he comes.
How deep did you go?
No, like this is honestly, check this shit out on YouTube. Like he's pals with the guys for like Conversion Botch and all the covers, like bringing people for all these bands like
Okay.
Mastodon and all that, and it's pretty cool. The cover of The Road to Hell is pretty good as well. But yeah, Arsenio's an amazing guitar player. When he's doing the late night host bit, he's dressed in a suit but with full on like corpse paint. It's pretty funny. And he's a phenomenal, like I said, phenomenal player. But he knows all, like he's in with that like Mutoid Man and like Justin Brodsky crew and all
Goodness.
that.
1997, they also brought out Experiments in Nocturnal Sound and Energy.
Basically a single for their Fine Art of Original Sin.
Yeah, but it's got a more experimental feel to it, as per the title. But it takes more weird turns and has more uncomfortable angles. It's got the first track on it, Philopsychosis, which is on the album. Great opening beat and a bridge that's a bit more amphetamine reptile noise rock than it is punk rock. The third track in this, though, I think is really interesting. It's 13th Dream and it's a remix.
The remix, yeah.
And it's worth pointing out that the Junglist remix of this track makes an appearance here. It's the first hints of that Shape of Punk to Come precursor, experimental flavours where there's genres. And obviously the album, Fine Art, would then continue that idea as the next release.
Yeah.
I did notice as well that the tracks begin to get quite long, partly I think to let them experiment with throwing in ideas and time changes and extra sections as their songwriting becomes more diverse. They need to put more space in their tunes, so their tunes regularly stretch well over 4 and 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is kind of unusual for a band from that genre. 1999, we're skipping past the album because we'll come back to that, but 1999 they brought out a split with Icarus Line, a band that have cropped up now and again but we've never actually gone into specifically. It's called We're Never Gonna Make It split. There's one track each. The Ink and Dagger one's called The Solo Mission. It's self-recorded and self-produced and it's really crunchy. This track is on Spotify. I think there's only 5 tracks on Spotify in total. It's a pretty unusual tune. I think it's maybe one of their best. and again, it's much more noise rock than hardcore, but I think it's quite well chosen given the Icarus Line pairing, because Icarus Line were an unconventional band in that sense as well.
Agree.
1999 also saw the Sensation EP. There's only 2 tracks. The first one, Mere Withdrawal, is energetic, but I found it actually a little bit sloppy in the playing. The muted guitar stuff on it is not incredibly tight.
Yeah.
And the second track in that, Part-Time Prophet, I think is really good. Typically frenetic and throaty post-hardcore. I prefer it to the lead track.
That turns up on the last record as well, Part-Time Prophet.
It does, yeah. And the last thing they released in 99 was a split with a band called Le Shock. L-E-S-H-O-K. The track by Ink Dagger was called Catch the Flashback. It's decent enough. It's got a double track shouty vocal on it, which is a bit of development. And it gets a wee bit jazzy and fancy in the middle. It's not too bad. In 2000, they have a track on a kind of compilation of artists covering a band called Metro Shifter. That's Schifter, and it's all one word. The album's called Encapsulated, and there's 14 covers on it by different groups, including Get Up Kids, Refused, Elliot, I think with 2 T's, Joan of Arc, Burning Airlines, Promise Ring, loads of alumni of that era. I think that band, Metro Shifter, were from Lafayette in Indiana. The Ink and Dagger track's called Actress. Starts fairly standard, but it allows them to stretch their legs a wee bit because it goes into this quite proggy, almost a wee bit stonerish post-rock. There's some solos in it and stuff. It's the kind of thing that you don't often hear from them. So yeah, they seem to enjoy themselves on that. And then their final proper release was Ink and Dagger, the self-titled album from 2000. Now, that was released on Buddyhead, which is the Icarus Line's label. It reflects some of the eclecticism of that band, Icarus Line. Right from the start, the first track, She Came Crashing, has chunks of everything from Jesus Lizard to Fu Manchu. Right the way to Black Rebel Motorcycle Club.
Yeah, it's got a lot of textures in it, that song.
Yeah,
and
very eclectic.
Yeah, the vocals all across this record are also more spoken, so he seems to be moving away generally from singing on this record.
I think the mix on it is a bit blown out, and it makes it a bit tiring on the ears. I think they've tried to maximise it in a way that is just a bit exhausting, you know. The record's also got a number of segue tracks, so wee ditties.
I like Sarcastic Sunrise as a segue.
It's the one I picked out, actually.
Acoustics, like guitars. It's
experimental psychedelia or something like that. That's what I meant as well. Like that Black Rebel Motorcycle Club thing is in there. It's a more mature sound and it kind of works for them, and as I said, it would have been interesting to hear this direction mature. Now, I realise that the band had agreed to call it a day, but many bands agree to call it a day and then decide to reform once they've got their breath back. That didn't happen, obviously, with Sean's passing. The 8th track in that album, Lolita, is a super saturated, slower tempo post-hardcore mosh. I think that's worth a listen. The 9th track, Creatures Like Us, is slow and groovy and has this weird blissed out thing to it. Like a much heavier Black Rebel Motorcycle Club.
Yeah, it's quite conventional, that song. In fact, a lot of the parts of this record are quite conventional sounding compared to what they were doing before. I quite liked the lines of Lies. It had almost a college rock feel with like an Eastern vibe in the verses. And Part-Time Prophet is kind of similar to early Ink Dagger, but it's got, like you said, those slower sections that kind of let it breathe a little bit.
Yeah.
Also becomes quite oddly uplifting towards the end, which is also...
I think there's like little ingredients like Brian Jonestown Massacre, kind of like disturbing sort of drug addict sort of psych to it as well.
And the last song is Face Talker, which it actually feels more like a sort of straight up alt rock song. And that's actually Josh Byrne on the vocals for this track. And I've got a quote from him about this, which I think is really interesting. He says, "I sang the whole song because Sean never showed up and we needed to finish it."
Wow.
We didn't have lyrics, so I just picked up a book of Charles Bukowski.
This reminds me of the Black Sabbath episode.
Yeah. I picked up a book of Charles Bukowski poems that were just lying around the studio. I randomly opened a page to FaceStreamer and just put all the vocals together on the spot as we were recording it. I'm super proud of it. But the lyrics, man... The best often die by their own hands. Sometimes we will only note their existence suddenly in vivid recall after they're gone. Where have they gone to? That's the last track on the record. And
it's
then,
mad,
yeah, he said that's just really sort of almost prescient. You know?
The album's got a lot of compelling new flavours and ingredients, as you say. It just, for me, lacks the songwriting to bring those together in a satisfying way. There's lots of compelling style, but a little bit lacking in substance. And I just want to draw one comparison here, because I think they're contemporaries of them as well. It reminds me a lot of Les Savy Fav, because some of their stuff, it gets so much right but then lacks a hooky core. However, Les Savy Fav prove that when you get both aspects right, the results are spectacular. What I mean by that is that it's not something they always do, but when they do it, it's just a wow thing. And I feel with Ink Dagger, they're getting so much right about the style, but the core of the song was not yet there. Les Savy Fav proved to me that if Ink Dagger had just managed to crack that last thing and just get a couple of really good fucking hooks, I think the results would have been pretty fucking special. They could add a couple of really good breakout tracks, because they had everything else going on really well. Lots of different options as well. They'd kept their palette really diverse. So with any subsequent records, they could have gone in so many directions without it feeling inconsistent or thirsty. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Thirsty, not Thursday, by the way. But yeah, I'm frustrated by this record because so many times it feels like, oh, this could be fucking amazing, and it just never quite gets to that bit.
Yeah, I feel as though if they could have, and they hadn't decided to disband, they would have had a real merit in pushing past to the next record. You know, because there probably would have been something quite special there, because this feels like there's pieces sliding into place. You know, this would be the awkward middle ground between the original sound and some kind of new version of it, which takes in all those different disparate influences to create.
It also evolved so naturally as well. You know, they come up through 4 different years of playing and in a really organic way, and they were getting to some really interesting conclusions. So
also got to remember, this is only their 4th year as a band as well.
Yeah.
You know, so they've churned through a lot of music by this point in their career as well. It only made sense that they would continue to evolve if they had continued to be a band, and obviously Sean had lived.
So we're looking at a wee bit more detail at the fine art of Original Sin from 98. By the way, the liner notes to this say, "Have a laugh at our expense as we blow this world up from the inside."
Yeah,
there you go. So Vice, your man at Vice again, had some really interesting comments in this. I'll throw a couple of quotes here. Ink Dagger used the fine art of Original Sin to expand what was possible inside the walls of hardcore. Devore avoids hardcore signature chug in favour of an embrace of more textural compositions. The fine art showed that Ink Dagger was more than just a gimmick or some early example of musical trolling, and that there was a purpose to all their strange decisions. It was the band's willingness to run counter to the hardcore scene itself that remains the most important part of their legacy.
Mm-hmm.
He also points out that electronic dalliances and post-production choices signalled the band's intent to make an album that sounded like an LSD-addled party. It shifted away from the standard punk fare as the music began to warp at its edges until it completely spun out. And with the fine art, Ink Dagger proved that punk was more than just a costume. It's in your blood, whether you want it to be or not. Now, a lot of that is actually what we spoke about in The Shape of Punk to Come, or skirting around the edges, and Refused got a lot of plaudits retrospectively for that, albeit even though the album was very modestly received at the time. It's seen as being a watershed moment in terms of defining punk as an innate sensibility that could actually sound very different. It wasn't about, oh, you've got to tick all these conventions. Actually, ticking all the boxes of those conventions is remarkably unpunk if you construe the word in that sense. And so doing something off the cuff and throwing in musical influences and sounds that seem really at odds was in fact very punk. Unsettling people, challenging people. At its very root, punk was meant to be challenging in whatever way you take that, and this album certainly does reflect that.
It's interesting how, well, let's not fall down this rabbit hole, punk did diverge, didn't it? You know, it became less about being challenging and became a style, you know, a sound, as somebody that plays it, you know.
Well, it's basically a fork in the road where there's the punk, the template sound, or there's punk, the mindset, and that's where the two different, you know, I mean, certainly there's some people that end up doing both, but not that many.
Yeah.
And some of the punkier artists have ended up in really quite far removed projects.
Absolutely.
Sonically.
Yeah.
In terms of tracks, I'm not going to go through them all, but I picked out a few highlights. We have to start with the first one, the title track, The Fine Art of Original Sin.
It's great song.
I will say, and I don't mean this as a criticism, it's like a doughy version of At the Drive-In, right? Because it aspires to that sort of manic, flitting energy that band had, but the tones themselves are heavier and they kind of weigh it down a bit. It's still full of energy, right? But it's not got the lighter tones and the lighter touch that At the Drive-In used, because their heaviness was in the energy. This track actually adds the heavy via the pedals. Does that make sense? Because I always felt like when you actually listen to the guitars in At the Drive-In, they're really quite clean. They're gainy, but they're not dirty or heavy, or there's not many bar chords in them. It's a lot of movement and a lot of texture and frenetic energy. Whereas on this, there's a fair bit of that, but the tones themselves are always a bit more saturated, and there is a lot more chug on it that just makes it feel just a bit denser, a bit more, you know, a heavier gravity working on it. The opening lyrics, although we spoke about earlier on, they were trying to leave a lot of the vampire shtick behind them. The very first lines are crucifixion, benediction, it's all I've ever known. So it does give a nod to that vampiric lore, albeit it was fading. I will also say I love the bass break at about 3:20.
Oh, it's fucking class. I've put that down as well. It's actually the first of two breakdowns, both of which have really great bass bits.
But again, you can see why the songs are getting longer, because they want to throw these ideas in. Yeah,
the bass playing is class throughout the whole thing. It gets weird and creepy in that second breakdown as well. It becomes quite psychedelic and trippy, so they're already starting to experiment with these forms that they would later explore in more depth on the next record. I really like this song. I'm a big fan of the weird keys in it, and the drumming is really interesting too.
Some good keys.
It's just not super conventional. Sean's voice is perfect. Like I said earlier on, I can hear Gerard Way, I can hear Geoff Rickly. There's no doubt so many other vocalists from America who were doing post-hardcore and were entrenched in very small local scenes that were taking stuff from Ink and Dagger, because their records would have been probably reasonably easy to find back then if you moved in the, you know, circles that actually still bought records and went to niche record stores and all that. This is a band that just barely exists now, which is just so sad, I think. I
really like his pitching vocally.
His pitching is great, and that's the Gerard Way thing that I hear. His pitch is exactly the same. But yeah, no, good song, really strong opener for this record. The next track, Psychosis, is great.
We mentioned that.
We mentioned it before. It's great.
Before.
I just want to say some of the guitars sound like early My Chemical Romance and Glassjaw in that one, particularly rhythms and chord choices for me.
My next notes are on the fourth track, Cutthroat Tactics.
Yep, I've got that.
I think there's a real swagger to it.
It's quite straightforward as well.
Yeah, there's a bit more of an embrace of rock and roll in that one, vis-a-vis those little guitar flourishes that are on every line. I think that muted cacophony section is really feral too. It's a really nice change of texture.
Totally. I really like the bass has got a chorus on it and it's played high up the neck, so it gives almost a post-punky feel, which I quite enjoyed.
You like a post-punky feel?
Well,
Susie's changed you.
I've been listening to a lot of goth stuff over the last couple of weeks, right? So there's a really high chance we're going to get some episodes on like the Sisters of Mercy and stuff like that at some point.
Fields of the Nephilim yet?
I have listened to them. I've listened to them earlier on, actually. They're Nephilim.
You're going to start corpse painting, aren't you?
I'm too old for that now, man. I should have got into that when I was younger. The palm mute, so back to the song, Cutthroat Tactics, the palm muting and staccato rhythm around 40 seconds is really good fun, also kind of unsettling. And David Anthony's right in what he says. Every single song pushes hardcore in different directions. It's like they're trying to explore the outer fringes of what that sound can be, and they do it on all the tracks, but this is a really, really good example of them doing that.
The fifth track, 6 Feet Under Swindle, we need to talk a wee bit about the lyrics in here. So Vice, I'll refer to him. The lyrics tell the story of Sean sitting in a graveyard with Sex Pistols bassist Sid Vicious when the deceased rocker opines that rock and roll is better off dead. McCabe screams this line with glee and spends most of the song's midsection in a laughing fit, mocking rock and roller's rotting corpse.
That's mad, that bit with the laughing at the end is just legitimately mad.
He continues, it was the kind of thing that could only be done by a bunch of mischievous kids that wanted to test the limits of punk, and the fact it actually worked was a testament to both their creativity and commitment.
There's a real threatening hint of conventionality at the start of this song before it does fully embrace the chaotic intertwining guitars and the mathed up rhythm section, which becomes really the hallmark. So many bands have copied this sound since, and it's probably a crime that this band aren't as recognised as they should be. Like I said earlier on.
That's what this show's for, Mark.
Yeah. When the guitars drop out and the feedback and all the keys come in, it's just a really lovely texture. It's not a nice texture, but it's just lovely in the sense that it pulls the song together. It just sits so well, and then when it roars back into life around 2 minutes, it just gets so many good riffs. And that's one thing we've not really spoken about, is they sometimes will deploy a banger of a riff and it just carries, just hits at the right moment and carries sections, and it's brilliant. And 2 minutes in this song is a really good example of that.
I think the sixth track, The History in Ecstasy, is a highlight for me.
That's a banger of role-playing riff. Like I was
going to say, a lot of that's to do with how good that riff is. And it does remind me a bit of the nervous energy that I also like from Icarus Line's debut album, Mono. It's got a lot of that to it, a bit of an anxious tension to it. The seventh track, Vampire Fast Code.
Thank you for calling Dagger Industries. Begin upload now!
Well, there's a drum and bass track like mixed in there at the start, and it's got wee hints as a result, Pitch Shifter or Atari Teenage Riot. If you consider the mixed gender vocals and the general anarchic melee. There's also the fact they keep shouting "break the system." That kind of makes me wonder, is it an overt tip of the cap to Atari Teenage Riot at this point?
It could have been. I mean, I think the idea of the title of the song as well, it's definitely a nod to some kind of digital thing, because it sounds like the whole song's been bathed in just digital noise. And it makes it really harsh, but not in a really abrasive way, which I know that when I say it like that, it doesn't really make much sense. It's a combination of words, but you can have harsh sounds that they don't turn you off, if that makes sense. And I think there's a good example of that in this song. It's scuzzy feeling is what I'm saying. It's scuzzy.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's washed, but it doesn't feel caustic. I think it's a really good use of that heavily saturated mix, actually.
Yeah, I agree.
And then you're basically at the end of the album here, because the 8th track is a remix of the opening track, The Fine Art of Original Sin. We've got some needle scratches on here, some turntable in Welcome to the Late 90s.
Yep.
This is a real outlier, and I do refer back to that previous EP single release with the drum and bass remix. It's a bold way to finish an album, although it did make me think, in the late 90s, it maybe wasn't actually as unusual as it might seem in hindsight. I do remember a fair amount of bands having these kind of like dubby, jungly remixes popping up on singles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Do I like it as a track? Nope.
Yep.
Not one bit. It's fucking rubbish.
Yeah.
But do I think it's interesting? Of course, and especially in the genre, and especially in the context of, like we said, a precursor to the shape of punk to come, trying to explode the boundaries of what this genre was capable of. Yeah, it's a very interesting decision. Taking that track off, because it is a remix, it's basically a 7-track album, and yeah, it's an exercise in economy.
Absolutely, yeah.
You get a lot from it. It's really succinct. And I think that all said, I find them as a band very, very compelling, very innovative, genuinely a bit raw and edgy, and very punk, even if that could potentially manifest as being kind of gobshites at points. As I said, if I only need to read about it and lol rather than apologise for it or tidy up after them, then I'm fine with that. The fact that I always had them in my peripherals, the way I described from literally like the turn of the century, but never fully got into them, means I suspect I probably won't go back to them very much. Despite the fact that this has actually been a fairly enjoyable process for this episode, I still don't feel like they've really clicked as a band with me, and maybe that's just never really going to happen. But it definitely excited me intellectually. There was definitely a lot about them that I found really engrossing and entertaining, and yeah, and I'm glad they existed. I'm glad there was a band out there being those fucking tearaways. It does make the world a more interesting place. And I think musically I would put them in the same category as, here's a band, two bands actually that we've not mentioned so far in this show that I think are relevant. Brainiac and Farakay. Both bands that were pushing the boundaries, taking post-hardcore sounds, throwing in noises and stuff. And that's highly respectable company. I don't listen to either of those bands often, if at all, but I massively respect those bands. They just never really spoke to me musically. But I would really put Ink Dagger up there with any of them as being as good as any of them, and probably a damn sight more influential than most.
Yeah. So like I said earlier on, I kind of bounced off this when I first heard it, probably because my taste was more melodic and it was more commercial, I suppose. I'm glad I've come back to them though. I remember always thinking, man, I really need to come back to that band. I really need to listen to them again. Yeah,
that's me in 2004, then again in 2007, then again in 2010.
And now that I have listened to them, I can 100% see that this record is the missing link between Fugazi and the post-hardcore of the early 2000s. Mm-hmm. I was always like, yeah, Refused are probably the missing link, but they don't feel as though they are fully what these other really influential post-hardcore bands for the early 2000s were were coming from. It didn't really feel as though they were taking the energy from that. They were taking it from somewhere else to something a bit more angular, a bit more abrasive. And I think when you listen to this record and the Shape of Punk to Come back to back, the Shape of Punk to Come actually feels a bit stodgy in comparison. You know?
It's more linear.
Yeah, you know, and it feels as though it's definitely got a mission.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this band have a mission as well. They're probably not entirely sure like what direction that mission is going to go in.
Yeah, I mean, I get the feeling this band were more controlled by the message, and the Refused were steering the message. Like, you know, they were a bit more in control. There's something a bit more shambolic about Ink and Dagger, a bit more exciting, a bit more raw, in a nice way. Whereas Refused seem like the masters of their craft and very focused and very deliberate in what they did.
Yeah, precision engineered.
Yeah,
and that record, that Shape of Punk to Come, is very precision engineered.
Yeah, and to be fair to it, I think the individual songs, you know, Summer Holiday, for example, is a far better piece of concise musical writing for me. Musically, I like that song. I go back to that song. But do I think the album's better than this? I don't know that I do, even though I listen to it a lot more. Yeah. Sorry, I know that's a hard thing to really square, but on paper, I think this is probably as good, if not more exciting. Whereas I just want to listen to Shape of Punk to Come more often. Yeah,
I guess it really depends on where your taste lies when it comes to post-hardcore.
Fucking sellout. No? Imagine the point where listening to Refused means you're a fucking sellout.
I know. But, you know, I'm glad we did this record. I'm glad we came back to this band. I'm probably going to go back to this record. It's a shame it's not on Spotify, but I have it now on my phone, and it will stay on my phone.
And you can too, if you dig back into our episode and find that mention of that blog spot.
Aye, it's class. And one thing I did want to say about the reunion tour before we end, which I think is worth mentioning because it's wild, and it comes from Josh himself again. As you said earlier on, the initial part of the reunion tour was it was supposed to be a benefit for the guitar player from Crud and Flanagan's and Flagman's son. Then they were asked to do a few more shows, which they did. They did attempt to do a European tour, right, and it fell apart because Sean's brother Brian was really strongly against it. And to quote Josh, Brian found out we were going to take the whole thing to Europe. He was not happy at all, and he actually got really bad about it. He actually physically threatened my life, which makes sense because he's Sean's brother and he's a very extreme guy. But yeah, the reunion was short-lived, pretty much by design at that point, you know.
Wow, that's protective.
Very protective.
Yeah,
and that's interesting to have that protectiveness over a legacy which should be much bigger than it is. I guess there is art to be found here. I think that's probably the thing. Like, Shape of Punk to Come is arty, but this band's an art project. You know, and everything they do is about, like you say, the message and how it's communicated, you know.
Plus, Ink and Dagger are fucking dead, and at least they know how to stay fucking dead, courtesy of Brian, and as a result shall not sully their own reputation the way a certain Swedish band have.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been great fun doing this. I'm glad we did it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this doesn't happen often, but we can officially say, join us next week.
Oh dear.
Where we will, all things going to plan, cover a band called The Wild Hearts.
Is it 2019 again? We never usually have it on
we
lock.
Start scheduling. Yeah, we've discovered the joy of spreadsheets. And we're going to start writing things down in advance. Yep. We were knocked off track by a few interviews that were a little bit hard to pin down. But next week, we're going to do Wild Hearts, and we are going to do Fishing for Luckies. And if you don't like that, fucking come at me. So it turns out the Wild Hearts are playing next week in Glasgow, and that's an absolute coincidence because I did not know that.
We will record this episode the day before they play, or 2 days before they play, or something like that. So yeah.
I hope they're cheerier than the last time I saw them. Greeting-faced bastards in Stirling. Too good for us. Too good for us. Too good for Stirling. Get yourself down to Brindisi and get a pizza ginger. Yeah. That'll fucking cheer you up, mate. Right, okay, folks. Thanks for joining us.
Have a good one. Bye.
With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.